What's going on, Dolphins fans? Jacob here, Miami Dolphins Syndicate. I've been pretty happy with how free agency has gone. It would have been so easy for Chris Greer to try to save his job. I try to make some splash signings, try to bring in some big names, try to go after somebody in the trade market. However, I think he's been really smart with how he's handled this, so I've got to give him credit for going about a more economical approach and really not putting himself in position just to keep his job for 1 year and potentially set the Dolphins up for failure further on down the line. So, while on one hand, I definitely do enjoy what has happened so far in free agency, there are certainly quite a few holes still left on this team that we are going to talk about here today. Free agency is all but done. All the moves have really started to fall into place. Probably the Dolphins make one or two more signings from now till the summer, and then you see those veteran guys start to slip in closer to training camp. But the draft is right around the corner, and we are going to start making draft content probably starting next week, talking about specific players. However, this video is going to be targeted just at what the Dolphins currently have on the roster today. And the first position group we're going to talk about is a group that we have already addressed in free agency, a group that has been very frustrating to Dolphins fans over the last few years, and that is, of course, the offensive line, specifically more on the interior of the offensive line where the Dolphins need to see drastic improvement. We've seen, technically speaking, 3 signings in free agency period. Liam Eichenberg coming back, as well as James Daniels coming over from the Pittsburgh Steelers, Larry Boone coming over from the Chicago Bears. A group that certainly has been improved by the addition of James Daniels coming over from the Pittsburgh Steelers. However, a offensive line that has so many questions going into this year. What is Teron Armstead going to look like? We saw him so oftentimes last year. He more often than not would start the game and then come out after the first or second drive. So that's what we got at left tackle. Left guard, as of now, is likely going to be Liam Eichenberg, and that would not be a big fan of that. And I know most of you guys watching this would not be a big fan of that. In the middle of the offensive line, of course, Aaron Brewer last year. Look, I think he had a pretty good season last year. He wasn't quite as good as Connor Williams was the year prior before he went down with his ACL tear, but the center position is locked up for now. Aaron Brewer has, I believe, 2 more years left on his contract, so I'm not as concerned about him. We'll see how James Daniels ends up playing on the interior of the offensive line. There's a lot of good things coming out from what people are saying from his time with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and from what I've seen from him, he definitely is an improvement on this offensive line. And right tackle Austin Jackson, is he going to stay healthy? What Austin Jackson are you going to get? Because first few years, certainly a struggle outright for Austin Jackson, and then he started to get to his own, and then the injuries started to stack up. So right when he started to play well, the injuries started to stack up. Last year, you used one of your premier picks on Patrick Paul, and he saw limited usage. He was one of those guys that were more of a developmental piece, and that's where the Dolphins in general went with the draft last year. More developmental players, incredible athlete. We're not really sure whether that's going to produce on the actual football field. So you have a question mark there as with your next guy in line, with your 6th best offensive lineman. The Dolphins, with a premier pick in the first round, very well could go the route of bringing in another offensive lineman, specifically on the interior. So we just talked about the interior of the offensive line. Let's go ahead and flip that to the other side of the ball, the interior of the defensive line. And while we definitely can look at the offensive line and point at the issues that certain guys have, you could at the very least field a starting offensive line and backups. Whether those guys are adequate enough, whether they're good enough or not, is certainly up for debate. But when you look at the interior of the defensive line, there are 4 guys currently on the roster for the Miami Dolphins. It's really only Zach Sealer that you feel confident with going into next season at the defensive tackle position. He's surrounded by Benito Jones, who is stuck around this Dolphins team, has gone back and forth between the practice squad and the active roster, followed by Neil Farrell and Matt Dickerson. I have no clue who those guys are, but I'm just going to go ahead and assume they are not going to play big roles coming into this next season. So whether it's more free agents out there, whether it's the draft, the Dolphins quite literally have no choice but to address this position. And it is a position just similar to the interior of the offensive line, where we saw us get beat up last year, both literally in terms of injuries and as well as just playing ability. The defensive tackle position last year for the Miami Dolphins was certainly a weak point. You lose Christian Wilkins, and yeah, he goes down with the Raiders, but we know what type of season he would have had there if he stayed healthy, and we know what type of season we would have had here had he stayed in South Florida, had we been able to get that extension done. He was arguably the best defensive player on the Dolphins for about 5 years, and we let him go for free. And I certainly am happy with how Zach Sealer has played. He's a good run stopper, and he's gotten better and better each year getting to the quarterback. But we saw teams run all over us at times last year. There was just no physical presence up the middle, and oftentimes we saw teams control the clock in the fourth quarter because of that. So not only is there not any talent there outside of Zach Sealer, there just isn't anybody on the team there. So the Dolphins have, literally speaking, no choice but to address the defensive tackle position. Third position group we're going to talk about is a position group for many years the Miami Dolphins were actually one of the best in the league at, and we've really seen the talent drain from the team one way or another. Either guys, just flat out not playing anymore, guys moving on to other teams, replacements coming in for them not being good enough, and that is just the secondary as a whole. Last couple of years, we saw obviously Byron Jones leave the team. He never quite amounted to his contract, but still a really good player. Xavier Howard left the team last year, and then this offseason we just lost Javon Holland. Those are three massive players that the Miami Dolphins have lost in the last 5 years from the secondary. And you look at who they've replaced them with. Jalen Ramsey is still a star player as he's getting up there in age. Now, eventually, he's going to hit that cliff. Is that going to be this year? Is that going to be next year? We'll find out. But behind Jalen Ramsey, there's a lot to be desired. And as the league now transitions even more into a passing offense, you're not only unable to stop the run, you're unable to stop the pass. Behind Jalen Ramsey, I mean, you're looking at Storm Duck, you're looking at Ethan Bonner, you're in your safety positions, you're looking at two guys that just came in free agency with Ashton Davis and the guy that I still have no idea how to pronounce his name, the safety that came over from Detroit. A lot of backups, a lot of players that are going to have to step up. Kader Kohou, down season last year after a few really good years as undrafted free agent. Hopefully he can step back up and see the form we saw from him in like 2022, 2023 last year, a down season from Kader Kohou. But outside of it, aging Jalen Ramsey, you're not finding a lot of talent on this team. And this is a team that I feel like we do have quite a bit of star power on this team, and you find some of the star power here at the cornerback position. But the cornerback position, just like the offensive line, you see the premier players. You see of course on the offensive line your Teron Armstead, and you see here in the secondary you see your Jalen Ramsey. But you then pull back the facade and look at everything else, and I do not know how we're going to be able to stack up some of these better wide receiver cores in the AFC. So this last position that I'd like to highlight today is not a position of need, but it will be a position of need likely in the future. And it's certainly somewhere where we can use depth. We can use some players behind our one great player at the position. That is the tight end position. Jonnu Smith had one of the best, I think really since I've been alive, the best season I've seen from a tight end in a Miami Dolphins uniform. I mean, he was everything I expected him to be when we signed him. I was so incredibly excited when we signed him. He was that and more. My biggest thing with the tight end position going into last year was I want that extra element in the offense. I want somebody who is a little bit physical, who's not just out there to rely on speed, who's not the most precise route runner. I want somebody who's bigger, stronger, somebody you can find the ball close to the line of scrimmage when downfield options aren't working, and that was really the case last year. Jonnu Smith came in and was way more than a security blanket. He had, oftentimes we saw him as the number one option in a route tree, and he had his best season of his career so far, and he has 1 year left on that deal. We made a video earlier in the offseason, I believe, talking about how we need to see Jonnu Smith extended, and I 100% still stand by that sentiment. We need to see a Jonnu Smith extension, even if it is just 1 more year, because he is quickly approaching 30 years old. So even if we do get that contract extension, somebody else needs to come in and take some of the load off of his shoulders. A position the Dolphins have neglected pretty much my entire life. We finally get that, not necessarily top tight end in the league, but somebody who is able to produce with top numbers from the tight end position. You look beyond Jonnu Smith, and again, like the other positions we've talked about, really top heavy and not a lot behind him. Jonnu Smith followed by Julian Hill. Pharaoh Brown is brought in. Tanner Connor. Guys that have had very little success in the NFL. Julian Hill, a guy that just continues to frustrate Dolphins fans, whether it be drops, whether it be fumbles. He shows a little hint of athleticism every now and then, but not a lot of things that put a smile on your face as a Dolphins fan, to say that quite kindly. Durham Smythe, his time has obviously run out as a Dolphin, releasing him early on in the offseason. And he was the opposite of Jonnu Smith. Certainly somebody you are not drawing up plays for, somebody who is just going to be a sixth offensive lineman, and he'll occasionally catch a pass and he'll put a smile on your face. Be like, oh yeah, we still got that guy. He can still actually catch passes. He can actually run a route or two every now and then. But that time had passed, and we need somebody who can contribute better to the offense. And Jonnu Smith, while he is certainly capable, and I expected him to do so next year, whether he gets a contract extension or not, there is not a long-term answer at the tight end position for the Miami Dolphins. So I would love to see, I don't want to see probably a first-round pick. I probably don't want to see a second or third-round pick, but a fourth, fifth round pick, a day 2 pick at the tight end position, go out, and because you can find a George Kittle like the San Francisco 49ers do. Obviously, it's rare to do so. However, he was a 5th round pick, and look at the career that he's had. The talent is certainly out there, and there is definitely room on this roster for another talented tight end alongside, and maybe to take over for Jonnu Smith in the long term. So those are my biggest positions of need. Let me know your thoughts down below. Next week, we'll hopefully get into more player breakdowns on who the Miami Dolphins can look for as the draft is right around the corner. Let me know your thoughts down below. We'll see y'all next time. Have a great rest of your day. Go Dolphins.